So it talks about the tetzaveh talks about the menorah, and then it comes to the Cohen's outfit in chapter 28, and then you come to chapter 29, talks about the offering, the inauguration of the Mishkan, and then chapter 30, you have a few verses in chapter 30 here. And what's it talk about? It talks about the golden Mizbeach, the altar, right? Why is the altar here? At the end of the Parsha, it goes from the menorah. We learned about the menorah in the last Parsha, Teruma. All the inside pieces of the Mishkan. We learned all about the pieces of the Mishkan in Parsha Teruma. Then it comes to the menorah again, beginning with the menorah, the oil, and then the big day kahuna's outfits. And then it's like, oh, and here's the altar, the Mizbeach. It's like the Torah forgot to put it in the last Parsha. It's like, oh yeah, here's the altar. What's going on? At the end of the Parsha, it talks about the Mizbeach. HaKatoris. Now, when Shalom HaMelech, King Shlomo, was building the first Beis HaMikdash, last week we talked about the cherubim, the two cherubim on the Aron, right? And I mentioned how the Torah hints to two additional cherubim that Shlomo HaMelech made in the Beis HaMikdash. And now, this week, we're going to discuss how Shlomo actually took the Mizbeach of Moshe Rabbeinu and buried it. He buried this altar. All right? And he made a brand new Mizbeach Ketoris. He buried it. Why was it buried? Why would he do that to Moshe? Moshe, who built this, and for in the Torah, he built this, and Shlomo buries it? How could he do this? Rashi tells us that he actually made many shulchans, but he still kept Moshe's. And for some reason, he buried this altar. And the Orach Chaim, again, I love the Orach Chaim, but he talks about this. Okay, and actually, he talks about this in last week's Parsha. And he says in 1 Melachim, chapter 7, verse 48, we see that Shlomo had made a different one than that of Moshe, and he hid away Moshe's Mizbeach. As is clear in the words of Chazal, he says, for the verse states in 2 Chronicles, Divrei HaYamim, chapter 4, verse 7 to 8, that Shlomo made a brand new golden Mizbeach, as well as the 10 new shulchans and 10 new menorahs. I've heard something like he had, 10 representing 7 candles on each, representing 70, which is really a representation of the nations, the 70 nations, a light to the nations. Also, when the Mizbeach was made, what did the light in the Mizbeach, where did it portray? The windows were shaped unusual. They were shaped to make light go outside the temple, not to bring light in. Just like the menorah was not made for Hashem, but the light was going out of the temple because the light is from Hashem. And the Orach Chaim goes on anyway. He says there's a dispute, a machloket in Menachos 99a, as to whether in the Beis HaMikdash they would arrange the Lechem HaPanim, the table of showbread, only on that same shulchan made by Moshe, and kindle the lamps only on the same menorah made by Moshe. And then he goes on to say, or they would sometimes arrange the Lechem HaPanim and kindle the lamps on the 10 shulchans and the menorahs that Shlomo made, sometimes using the shulchan and menorah, and other times using another. But with regard to the golden Mizbeach of Moshe, there is no dispute. It is agreed upon matter that it was hidden away. All the sages say, yeah, Shlomo buried this Mizbeach. And that the service of the offering to the Ketoris was done only with that of Shlomo. We need to determine why then Shlomo hid away the golden Mizbeach of Moshe. And he goes on to say, it seems that the Torah alluded to the matter that by removing the passage containing the commandment regarding the golden Mizbeach from the place where it would have been appropriate to put it, meaning back in Teruma, it should have been there. The Or HaChaim says it's on purpose out of order. It's on purpose left here. Yeah, this is amazing stuff here. And I learned this week, so I was blown away. I couldn't wait to share this. But he says, for you will find that in setting out the commandments and to fashion the Mishkan and its vessels, the Torah first starts with the Aron, which is the innermost part of the inner vessels, standing in the Holy of Holies. And anyways, he goes on to the remez of all of this. What he's saying, what is he saying? Why did he bury the Mishkan? Well, I mean the Mizbeach. Why? Well, first of all, what was the purpose of the Mishkan? What is the purpose of the Mishkan? And how did the Mishkan operate? Well, the Mishkan was made in the wilderness, wasn't it? And what happened with the Mishkan? No more. The Mishkan also wasn't a permanent place. They had to travel, and they would set up camp and also take it down and trample and travel with it. So what's going on? The Mishkan was not a place of permanence. What about the Beis Hamikdash? The Beis Hamikdash is a place that was supposed to be permanent. All right, so the vessels in the Mishkan, the Or HaChaim saying in Parsha Teruma, were vessels of permanent. They were permanent vessels. The menorah is still used for all your generations, all of these things, right? So the explanation is the golden Mizbeach was not for permanent use. The Mishkan and its vessels, whatever it was used to be used for, was permanent in the Beis Hamikdash. Shlomo understood what was on the Mizbeach, poles, right?
Qadim, yeah.
And these poles were for traveling.
Is the Or HaChaim talking about a Mizbeach that is different from the one that the Torah describes?
No, he's talking about the actual Mizbeach here in the Torah, the golden.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned Mizbeach of Moshe.
Right, because Shlomo, and I'm talking about King Shlomo buried it. He buried the one that we're talking about. And okay. King Shlomo made a whole new Mizbeach.
I mean, when you mentioned that, I remember the Inside Hanukkah commentary, that when they came to cleanse the temple, one of the things that they buried was the Mizbeach.
Yeah, and Torah is kind of silent on this. But so you have in Parsha Teruma, it talks about the Aron, the menorah, the Shulchan, the Mizbeach, Zahav, etc. What happened to the Mizbeach Ketoris? So the menorah and the showbread are like the eyes. And then you have the Mizbeach, which is like the nose. So what happened to the nose? Right? And let's talk about it in the wrong Parsha. Also, Sepharno is also bothered by this. And he says, why is the Mizbeach mentioned in this Parsha? All the other vessels were for the purpose of the Shekinah dwelling with us, but not the Mizbeach Ketoris. This was made to honor Hashem. Everything else, it even says back in Parsha Teruma, in the beginning, which everybody talks about in 25 verse 8, it says, Ve'asu li migdash, and notice how it says migdash, not mishkan. It's talking about temple vessels. V'shechanti b'tucham, that make me a sanctuary, a mikdash, that I may dwell among you. Well, guess what the Shekinah is supposed to do? Find a permanent dwelling place. It's to permanently reside within us. These vessels in Parsha Teruma are permanent vessels that represent us. And the Mishkan is a place where we is used, the Sefarno says, it's to just used to honor Hashem. And so after the Shekinah dwelling with us, but not the Mizbeach, after the offerings, we say, Hashem, we want to honor you. In 1 Chronicles 16:29, it's a gift to God. Aren't we supposed to become a living sacrifice?
Korban High.
Teruma is talking about the Shekinah dwelling with us, and this was to honor Hashem. Why did Shlomo do this? The Beis Hamikdash had to represent the place of permanence. The Mizbeach had rings in it, poles in it. Shlomo said this looks like it's going to be on the move. It looks like it's going to be temporary. So we buried it and made a new one. And the Rambam in Mishnah Torah, Hilchot Beis HaBechiriyah, verse 1, it even says, let me see here. It's right, the very first mitzvah. This is what the Rambam says. It is a positive mitzvot to construct a house for God, prepared for offerings to be offered within. We must celebrate three times a year. And he refers to Teruma, Exodus 25:8, and you shall make me a sanctuary. The sanctuary constructed by Moshe is already described in the Torah. It was only temporary. Even Rambam says this. As Devarim 12:9 states, for at present you have not come unto the resting place and the inheritance. And so we will, what about the Aron? So some people will say, what about the Aron? It had poles in it, right? The poles were not designed for carrying the Aron. It wasn't, it even says it in the Torah, you shall not remove them, meaning permanent. The Aron did not demonstrate temporary, but the poles for the Keturah demonstrated it was on the move. What about the Shulchan? They had a reason to remain forever. The poles on the Aron, the Torah says you can't take out the poles. That's in Exodus 25, verse 13 to 15. Permanence. The Shulchan needed poles for a different reason. So I was reading in the Gemara, wherever the Gemara is now, Hagigah, in Daf 26, it actually, Reish Lakish brings up this question. He says, talks about the table is carried full and empty in accordance with the words of Reish Lakish. For Reish Lakish said, what is the meaning of that which is written? And you shall set them in 2 rows, 6 in a row upon the pure table. A pure table. Tame. What does it mean? The question, Vayikra 24:6, what are the words pure table teach us? What do you mean a pure table? Does a table come impure? And therefore the Torah warns us to make sure it is pure when the 12 loaves of bread are placed on them. So he's talking about the poles. And why do we indeed is the table susceptible to ritual impurity, being that it is a wooden vessel designated to rest in a fixed place, and should therefore not be susceptible to impurity. We don't move it around. It shouldn't be going around in impure places or anything. What's going on? Rather, this verse teaches us that they would lift the table with the showbread to display the showbread to the pilgrims standing in the temple courtyard, as it was prohibited for Israelites to enter the sanctuary. They would literally show them. They would just lift the table to show them. And they would say to them, behold your affection before Hashem, who performs a perpetual miracle with the bread. For when it is removed from the table on Shabbat, it's just as fresh as when it was arranged on the previous Shabbat. They were displaying the miracle from Hashem. And so this is what the Talmud says of why there was poles there. Amazing.
You mean like the dreidel?
Oh, snap.
Nes Gadol, Hayapo
yeah, very good, very good.
in Jerusalem.
A great miracle happened there. Nice, nice. Right. And so, yeah, it is. And so this is why the poles were there. So this is what the Reish Lakish says. So what is it all about? So the reason why the altar is at the end of this parsha is saying, I mean, even Shlomo made the same shape of the altar, but only he made it a lot bigger because there was a lot more members of Israel to serve and everything. So, and this was permanent. So what is the Beis HaMikdash supposed to represent? A place of permanence. It's not supposed to be destroyed, but we are the temple and the Shekinah dwells within us. And we are supposed to be the living sacrifice that glorifies Hashem.